ISIS playbook to a T. It's noon on the West Coast, 3 o'clock here in New York, where investigators told us that and much more today as they work to get answers about the man accused in the bike path terror attack. And teams around the world, from Uzbekistan to New Jersey, digging into his past for clues. While in Washington, intelligence specialists tell our Catherine Herridge the suspect rolled with a troublesome crowd. We'll take you to his homes and explain what we've learned about his plot. Plus, what we know about the innocent victims of this attack, the heroes who came forward to help, and how the big city is showing big heart.
My message to all New Yorkers is do what you do best. Be New Yorkers.
Don't let the bastards get you down.
Message received. Let's get to it.
Breaking news. Shepard Smith reporting live from the Fox News deck.
And we're waiting to hear from the White House at any moment now. The Press Secretary Sarah Sanders likely to face questions about the terror attack here in New York. We'll bring that to you live and uninterrupted when it begins. Today we're learning the suspect accused of mowing down people on the bike path, killing 8 and seriously injuring at least 11 others, spent weeks planning what would become the deadliest terror attack in New York City since 9/11. That's the word from the police today. They say they've been questioning the 29-year-old suspect at the hospital. According to the reporting of our network news service partner ABC7 here, the suspect said he was proud of the attack. Today, FBI agents and police searching for evidence in Paterson, New Jersey, where the suspect lives. It's about 15 miles west of Manhattan. Investigators there say the suspect is from Uzbekistan, came to the United States legally in 2010. Police say he has never been the focus of an investigation, but that he may have been connected to others who were. Cops say the suspect left a handwritten note, at least one, about the Islamic State inside and near the truck that he used to carry out the attack. The New York governor says the suspect was radicalized domestically, meaning he became this way once he was here. The suspect reportedly attended a mosque down in Tampa before he moved to New Jersey. The New York Times reports a man who preached at that mosque says he tried to steer the suspect away from extremism. According to the police, the suspect rented that pickup truck from a Home Depot in Passaic, New Jersey, not very far from his home, about 6 miles or so, a little after 2 o'clock Eastern time yesterday. About 30 minutes later, license plate readers caught the truck driving over the George Washington Bridge. Just after 3 o'clock local time, cameras in Lower Manhattan spotted that truck entering that bike path at a high rate of speed. I want to show you the map of where this happened. The truck got under that bike path at Houston Street and headed south down the West Side Highway, began driving. About a mile later, it collided with a school bus near Chambers Street, right by Stuyvesant High School, injured 2 adults and 2 kids. We have new video showing people and officers responding to that school bus crash.
Get stuck in here. Oh my God, oh my God. Hey, can you call 911? Oh my God. Oh my God. Okay, I need an ambulance right here. Right here. The guy T-boned. Come on, there's kids right there. Oh my God. Oh my God.
That was the end of the attack. After he hit the school bus, police say the man jumped out of the vehicle waving air guns and yelling Allahu Akbar, God is great, in Arabic. A police officer shot that suspect, injured him, they said at the time, critically. Listen to the police radio of the chaotic moments as officers started to respond to this.
Central, be advised, we have multiple people on the ground from Chambers all the way up to Houston. All the way from Houston to Chambers. There's multiple people on the ground, Central. We need buses from Houston all the way down to Chambers. I got 4 or 5 people on the ground. Got multiple casualties. This is a mass casualty situation here.
The president called the suspect an animal. He also announced he's starting the process of getting rid of the diversity visa lottery program. That program awards visas to people from countries that tend to have low immigration rates to the United States.
They say he came in through that program, so we'll see. We're looking at it, but they say he came in. Look, it's very simple. What we are demanding is merit-based immigration. We want people that are going to help our country. We want people that are going to keep our country safe. We don't want lotteries where the wrong people are in the lotteries. And guess what? Who are the suckers that get those people? And we want a merit-based system.
The Homeland Security Department today confirmed the suspect did enter the U.S. through that visa lottery program. President Trump earlier called it a Chuck Schumer beauty. Actually, President George H.W. Bush signed that law that created the program back in 1990. Immigrants around the world called it the golden ticket. Last year, more than 11 million people applied for 50,000 slots. Over time, fewer than 1% of applicants are accepted. All winners are heavily vetted. There are extensive background checks. In the year 2007, the Government Accountability Office offered improvements to that program, but found no documented evidence that golden ticket immigrants posed any threat. Today, the Senate Minority Leader defended his positions on immigration and blasted the president for politicizing this attack.
I have always believed that immigration is good for America. I believe it today. The contrast between President Bush's actions after 9/11 and President Trump's actions this morning could not be starker. Again, Mr. President, President Trump, where is your leadership?
Senator Schumer said the real solution is anti-terror funding. President Trump's proposed budget, cuts anti-terror funding by 25%. We have Team Fox coverage. John Roberts is at the White House waiting for the briefing to begin now. First to our senior correspondent, Rick Leventhal, who was way out in front of the investigation last night and is with us from Lower Manhattan. Rick, to you.
And Shepard, still an active crime scene here in Lower Manhattan at the intersection of Chambers Street and the West Side Highway, but probably not for long. We just saw an NYPD flatbed tow truck show up here, and I'm told as soon as they're able to load that Home Depot rented truck that was at the center of this attack onto that flatbed and get it out of here, they will reopen the West Side Highway. But this after a lengthy investigation over the last 24 hours with a massive team of crime scene technicians, NYPD detectives, and the FBI on scene collecting material, taking pictures, talking to witnesses, and asking the public for any photos or videos that might aid in the investigation. What they're confident of is that this lone attacker killed 8 and seriously injured a dozen, now in custody, and that terror was his goal. And what they've been trying to determine is why. They're trying to backtrack his trail and to see who he's been in contact with, who he's been talking to, who else might have had knowledge or may have helped or inspired him to carry out this attack.
He appears to have followed almost exactly to a T the instructions that ISIS has put out in its social media channels before, with instructions to their followers on how to carry out such an attack.
There are no barricades, Shepard, as you know, along the West Side Highway at Houston Street where the suspect entered the bike lanes, and no barricades here at Chambers Street where he ended that carnage. That's likely to change. One other note, Shepard, the suspect, we're told from a source at Bellevue Hospital, has now been moved to a prison ward within that hospital.
Wow, hundreds of miles of bike paths that are right on our streets in New York City. No way to put up barricades there, so you just wonder. Last night, they had the Halloween parade down in Greenwich Village. Rick, more than 100 people showed up. I'll talk more about that later. It was incredible. Now this weekend, because New York's finest never sleep, the New York City Marathon, 2.5 million people. How are they planning to deal with it?
Yeah. One of the biggest events of the year in New York City, 51,000 runners, as you mentioned, more than 2.5 million people, spectators lining the 26.2-mile route through all 5 boroughs of Manhattan, and security will be tighter than it's ever been in light of not just this attack, but recent events in Las Vegas and other attacks around the world. But authorities say they are ready and they are beefing up.
We've added more sand trucks, more blocker vehicles. I can't give you the exact number. I mean, I do have it. I can't give it to you, but it will be the most ever deployed at this event. We more than doubled our observation teams, our rooftop observation posts, as well as our counter-sniper teams from the Emergency Services Unit throughout the boroughs, not just here in Manhattan. And we've also added more heavy weapons teams.
The NYPD has to constantly adapt to the changing threat environment, Shepard, and unfortunately, it keeps getting more and more complicated.
Rick Leventhal, our main man on this one. Rick, thank you so much. The president is responding, as we've said. The Chief White House correspondent John Roberts with that for us now. John?
Good afternoon to you, Shep. You know, there will be a lot to chew over with the press secretary in just a few minutes when Sarah Sanders is expected to come out here. One of the things that she'll likely be asked about is the president's declaration a short time ago that if he had his druthers, he would send the person responsible for the heinous attack in New York yesterday down to the facility at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, where he could be interrogated without the presence of an attorney. This idea was first suggested earlier today by Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, who believed that we could gain some valuable information from talking to this person about what the connections were to terrorism, how this person became radicalized, and without the benefit of having an attorney there, we could likely get some more information out of him than before. To the best of our knowledge, this would be the first time that anybody who committed a crime on U.S. soil would be sent down to Guantanamo Bay. You might remember Jose Padilla from Brooklyn. He was the so-called dirty bomber. He was declared an enemy combatant, sent to the brig in South Carolina, but was not transferred to Guantanamo. Eventually, he made it into the federal court system where he was sentenced to more than 17 years in prison. But after Senator Graham raised that question, Major Garrett from CBS, who happens to be seated just to my left here, asked the president during a pool spray in the cabinet room whether or not he supported that idea. Let's listen here.
Mr. President, do you want the assailant from New York sent to Gitmo? Mr. President?
I would certainly consider that, yes.
Are you considering that now, sir?
I would certainly consider that. Send him to Gitmo. I would certainly consider that, yes.
No idea whether that's even legally possible at this point, Shep, because he does remain in custody there in New York City. But if the president had his druthers, certainly, that's what he would like to see happen. Shep?
Then there's the political back and forth, Senator Schumer and the president.
Yeah, and that was unusual because you'll remember in the early hours and even the first couple of days after the horrific shooting in Las Vegas, the president was saying, now is not the time to be talking about politics or policy. Let's mourn the dead. But the president jumped right into it this morning, blaming Chuck Schumer for what happened. The fact that this guy got into the country on one of those diversity visas. True that back in 1990, Senator Schumer was one of the supporters of initiating a visa diversity program, but also true that as a member of the Gang of Eight in 2013 supporting comprehensive immigration reform, he wanted to take that off the table. But the president believes that he can make some political points on this toward his vision of immigration reform. And so he's looking squarely at Chuck Schumer to say, he is the reason why this person got into this country, you know, loosely connecting, I guess, the very fact that he did it yesterday with the fact that Schumer wanted to support this. But the president also getting some criticism, not just from Senator Schumer for going political on this, but also from New York's Mayor Bill de Blasio and Andrew Cuomo, the governor of New York, saying that the president's tweets this morning likely were not factual. They're certainly not helpful, and that at this stage of the game, nobody should be politicizing what happened in New York City yesterday. So as I said at the top, Shep, a lot to chew over with the press secretary here today in the Brady briefing room.
We'll look forward to it. John Roberts, thanks. We're keeping a close watch there in the briefing room. We expect that to start at any moment now with new reaction to the terror attack. And ahead, we'll talk to a terrorism analyst who specializes in cases just like this. People who are inside the United States and then become radicalized, apparently online. Investigators say this suspect followed ISIS playbook exactly, which again raises the question, why is terrorism manual so easy to find? That's all coming up. And I want you to know, New York City made you proud last night. 4 hours after this attack began. It started at 3 o'clock. At 7 o'clock, the Greenwich Village Halloween Parade began. I've lived there for 15 years. It's always insane on every level. But you wondered about last night. You know, Rick Leventhal and I were talking about it on the air. Will people really come out? People can't get in from New Jersey. The west side of town's completely backed up. Who's going to be there? There were 1 million people there in our streets, our tiny streets in our little community. 1 million of them. When I was walking home late last night after work, every bar was full, every street was packed. Police were in the streets everywhere. There were barricades and sand trucks, and people were shaking cops' hands and saying, thank you so much, thank you for being here. And cops were saying, and thank you for being here. Thanks for coming out and being a part of our community. Thank you for doing what our leaders have said from Washington all the way down to New York. Stay strong. Do what you do. Be New Yorkers. Don't change your way. That's what they want. Don't stay at home when you plan to go out for Halloween. So it wasn't a lot of young people. It was, but not like it usually is. Normally, it's just kids everywhere. Adults, but young people. Just everywhere, all over the village. Last night, there were a lot of families. We saw a lot of older people, senior citizens, and a lot of grandkids. A lot of pets dressed in, you know, with all the Halloween frivolity. And by the time it was late, you know, it was a kind of a Greenwich Village mess. But this morning, the street cleaners were out really early and everything was cleaned up. Kids were walking to school early this morning on a brisk day, probably the coldest morning so far. Buses were loading, people were getting onto subway stations. 6th Avenue was a mess, but New York City was strong and solid and impressive. This city does not bend, not to anyone. Here's Sarah Sanders.
Offering our thoughts and prayers today with the people of New York City, some of the toughest, most resilient people on earth, in the wake of yesterday's cowardly terrorist attack. This attack underscores that the terrorist threat is real. As we defeat ISIS and affiliated groups abroad, we must be vigilant here in our country as they seek other ways to attack the homeland. Inspiring such attacks through hateful propaganda has always been part of ISIS and other terrorist strategy. This underscores the need for the most careful vetting of who enters our country. There are hundreds of active law enforcement investigations into foreign nationals suspected of engaging in terrorism, and we must vet those seeking entry to the United States thoroughly. Last night, just hours after the attack, 1 million New Yorkers, including families with their children, marched through the city for a Halloween parade. Their message was heard loud and clear. The American spirit will never be broken. Those who hope we will succumb to fear will never get what they want. And those who seek to divide us will only bring us closer together. In the midst of the attack, New York City's finest, our incredible police and first responders, rushed to the aid of their fellow citizens. They did their duty, they ran into danger so that others could run away to safety, and they performed like the heroes they were born to be. Specifically, Officer Ryan Nash, a 5-year veteran of the NYPD, was among the first to respond to the scene and fired the shot that stopped the attacker from continuing the violence. He's a hero, but that doesn't come as a surprise to most of his colleagues. He's already received 2 awards during his young career, one for excellent police duty and another for other police action. Yesterday, he earned something that could never be properly displayed by a ribbon or a medal. He earned the never-ending thanks of a grateful nation. The President has vowed to defend our country, protect our communities, and put the safety of Americans first. This is the oath he took as President, and that is his sacred pledge to the citizens of our country. And with that, I'll take your questions. John.
Sarah, in the hours, in fact the days after the horrific shooting in Las Vegas, the President repeatedly said, now is not the time to talk about policy, now is not the time to talk about politics. That's for another time. Right now, we need to mourn the dead. Yet this morning, the President launched into a political argument with Senator Chuck Schumer on Twitter, literally hours after this incident yesterday. Why was he so quick to go the political route and point fingers at Chuck Schumer for the fact that this person was in the country at all?
Well, look, this wasn't about going the political route. This is something that, frankly, the President's been talking about for a long time. This isn't a new policy. This isn't a new position. This isn't a new conversation. The President has been talking about extreme vetting and the need for that for the purpose of protecting the citizens of this country since he was a candidate, long before he was ever president. This isn't a new argument. This isn't a new position, and this wasn't new for the President to speak about it. Cedar.
We heard today at about 11:30 this morning from the mayor and the governor of New York, who had said at that time that the President had yet to call. Has the President called his mayor, his governor? He's in New York.
The President has spoken with both the mayor and the governor of New York. Now,
Sarah, why wasn't Uzbekistan on the travel ban list?
As we've outlined multiple times before, those are determinations made by several factors. In large part, Congress helped play a role in determining a lot of those factors in placing specific priorities on different countries, and that would be the reason that they weren't in part of that.
Calling for Uzbekistan to be put on the list?
Look, that may be something that's looked at, but that isn't something that we have called for at this time, but certainly haven't ruled it out.
I'm just curious why.
Look, I think again there are a lot of different criteria that we use to determine which countries should be on there, and they haven't been determined as one of the countries yet. But I'm not saying that that's been ruled out either. Jordan.
Thank you, Sarah. On Senator Schumer, can you tell us when is the last time he and the president spoke, and more broadly, the president saying that he is responsible, at least in part, for this attack? Does the president still see him as someone?
Before you go any further, let me be really clear. The president has not blamed Senator Schumer and doesn't feel that the senator is responsible for the attack. We believe very strongly that the individual who carried out the attack is responsible and no one else. However, we do think that there are policies that could be put in place that help protect American citizens. We've been talking about those for a long time, and we continue to push and advocate for those policies.
Does the president still see Senator Schumer as someone he can work with?
I think we'd love to work with Senator Schumer to pass legislation on extreme vetting, and if he's willing to do that, we would absolutely welcome his support on it. John Decker.
Thanks a lot, Sarah. The president was asked a little bit earlier when he was meeting with his cabinet about the possibility of sending this terror suspect to the detention facility at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, and he said he is indeed open to that. Does the president believe he has the authority as commander-in-chief to send this terror suspect to Gitmo? That's my first question. And my second question is about Gitmo. What advantages does the president see in sending this terror suspect to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba?
Look, the point he was making is that he supports or would support that, but he wasn't necessarily advocating for it, but he certainly would support it if he felt like that was the best move.
Are there advantages in terms of sending any terror suspect to Guantanamo?
That's a question I think we'd have to dive into deeper and certainly talk with the interagency process before answering that. Matthew.
Thanks, Sarah. The president said last night that he'd ordered DHS to step up, quote, our already extreme vetting. I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit specifically about what extreme vetting entails and if there's any indication that it might have had an impact on preventing yesterday's attack.
Sure. Some of the specifics for extreme vetting would be enhancing the collection and review of biometric and biographical data, improving our intelligence streams, improved documentation requirements and verification, improving information sharing with partner nations and foreign law enforcement and intelligence services, and an overall heightened scrutiny and more thorough review procedures for CBP and other agencies that would play a role in that process. Major.
Sarah, separate from the Guantanamo Bay question, does the president believe this suspect should be classified as an enemy combatant?
I believe we would consider this person to be an enemy combatant, yes.
Would the president therefore instruct the Justice Department not to charge him in federal court and to therefore use the powers of enemy combatant and that status to treat him differently, not only in terms of interrogation, but prosecution?
I don't believe that determination has been made. I think that's something we'll wait till we get a little further into the process.
To not having him charged at all in federal court?
Again, I said we haven't made that determination, so I'm not going to speak to that yet until we've gotten...
You said you're open to the enemy combatant thing. You think
I said we would consider him to be an enemy combatant, but in terms of how we would process, yes.
And on what basis?
I think the actions that he took certainly justify that.
Does the green card status in any way influence that determination?
Not that I'm aware of. Kristen.
Sarah, I want to follow up on the question John was asking you earlier. You're making the case that these are not new policies he's talking about. And yet the question still remains. He is delving into a policy and political discussion. And he and you were very clear after the Las Vegas shooting that it wasn't appropriate to talk about policy. So what's the difference now?
I said it wasn't appropriate to politicize the conversation, which I don't believe we are. We're talking about protecting American lives. And there are things that this president has consistently and repeatedly talked about, advocated for, pushed for, introduced executive orders for, supported legislation for, time and time again since long before he was even president of the United States, that support this position. It's not a new position. There are facts that we know about this horrific tragedy that we know caused some of the things in this horrific tragedy that I think determine what those policy positions that he's been advocating for long before yesterday are very consistent with the activity that could have prevented something like this from happening.
The president invoked Chuck Schumer's name, so how can you argue that it's not a political argument that he's making?
Look, Senator Schumer has supported these opposing policies, and I think that that is very basic fact. Margaret.
It's not unifying the country. Is he failing to unify the country at this
He
critical
helped
moment?
implement them on the front end long before the Gang of Eight. And the Gang of Eight would have only addressed one part of that problem, as we've talked about many times before. He may have helped isolate one part of the problem, but it would have exacerbated so many other parts of the problem that fall within our immigration system. If you only address one part and not in the totality of it and introduce a fully and more responsible immigration reform like the president has proposed, like the president has outlined, then you're not addressing the problem, you're not fixing the problem, you're only making things worse. Margaret.
Republicans who voted for it, Sarah?
Margaret.
When he's talking about quicker, greater punishment, is he just talking about better enforcement of laws that currently exist, or is he talking about some sort of extrajudicial process? And are you looking at doing an executive order that would empower him? Would he make something like that public, or would you consider doing a secret order? And very quickly, I also want to ask you, is he really serious about tying the Obamacare mandate stuff to the tax thing? Or that seems like you would just blow the whole deal up, blow right through that Thanksgiving.
Very different questions. Let me try to address the first part in terms of, I believe he was voicing his frustration with the lengthy process that often comes with a case like this. So I think that was simply the point he was making. In terms of the mandate, we're focused on pushing through tax cuts and tax reforms separately. Obviously, we've never made it a secret that we'd like to repeal and replace Obamacare. We'd still like to do that, but we still think it's probably more likely to do something like that in the spring.
Sarah, Chuck Miller, the Deputy New York City Police Commissioner, said the suspect committed the attack in the name of ISIS. Governor Cuomo said the suspect was associated with ISIS. How can the president make the case that we are annihilating ISIS when an attack like this occurs? Are his policies emboldening the remnants of ISIS?
Not at all. We certainly, I don't think there's any way that you could discredit the progress that has been made on ISIS with a total defeat taking place in taking away their strongholds in both Raqqa and Mosul. But when that happens, as the president even said today, you have people that splinter off, go other places. Look, and we're meeting them in each of those places as much as possible, and we're going to continue to do that. It's another reason this president wants to institute extreme vetting to help keep more people out of our country that want to do us harm.
Thank you, Sarah.
Sorry, I was pointing at you.
The president said earlier, today starting the process of terminating the diversity lottery program. What did he mean by starting the process?
Just that we're going to continue pushing for and advocating for getting rid of this program. Something he's talked about. We'd like to see the lottery visa program not be part of any immigration system that we have in this country.
Okay, sorry, just to follow up on Margaret's question. So the president isn't considering any broader criminal justice reform?
As I said, we'll look at other specific ways to deal with it, but right now he was simply addressing his frustration with the lengthy process. John Gizzi?
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. A follow-up question on John Decker's question. The criterion that you listed for enhanced vetting sounds very much like that for a national ID card, a subject that comes up every few years in Congress, but which has never been acted on. Is the administration in favor of a national ID card as part of the enhanced vetting?
Look, we've laid out what our principles and our priorities are, and we'll work with Congress on determining the best way to make those specific pieces of legislation. But the things that I outlined are what we'd like to see, and whether or not what form that comes in, that's yet to be determined. But those are the principles we'd like to see take place in any extreme vetting program.
You're not ruling out a national ID card as part of the...
Right, but I'm also not saying that we're fully in. I'm saying that we've laid out the principles and the priorities that we'd like to see and that we think are important in an extreme vetting program. Blake?
Between the time the president sent the tweet out last night saying that he's called for a step up of extreme vetting until now, can you lay out exactly what has been stepped up in that time frame?
Look, I think he's taken a call to action. I know he's spoken several times with members of his national security team to look and see what specific things can be done. But we have put in place executive orders already since the president's taken office that help go as far as we can at this point.
Going forward on tax reform real quick, if I can, do you mind? It's possible that one of the things that Republicans are looking at right now is drastically lowering the cap for 401ks. The administration has consistently said that this tax plan has to help the middle class. So how would bringing down the cap on 401ks help the middle class?
Look, we're continuing to work with the House. I'm not going to negotiate, as I've said, I think every day this week with you guys here in the media. I'm going to let the economic team here at the White House work with members of both the House and Senate to put forth the best bill possible. We also are making sure that the priorities that we've laid out, including helping the middle class, are part of the final piece of legislation. We support where we are in the process right now, and we're going to continue working with both the House and Senate to make sure we get there. Eamon?
Thanks, Sarah. On that tax cut bill, what does the president want that bill to be called? There are reports that he wants to call it the Cut, Cut, Cut Act. Was that correct?
Look, I think the president, if it's called the cut bill, great. I think that the biggest priority that he has is making sure it does what he's laid out are his priorities in that piece of legislation. That's providing tax relief for middle class. It's making it more fair. It's making it more simple. Those are the things that he's mostly focused on. If it's called cut, 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 and it includes massive tax cuts like this president is proposing, I think we'd perfectly be fine with that name.
Federal Reserve Chair pick is a man or a woman?
No, I cannot tell you that, but I can once again echo that it's not Major Garrett again today. Still consistent on mentioning poor Major. Go ahead, Pierre.
Sarah, the president talked about wanting merit-based immigration today, and then criticized the diversity visa program. Is he aware that the diversity visa program actually does have a merit-based component to it?
Look, there may be a component of it, but the fact that we have a lottery system that randomly decides who gets the greatest opportunity in the world, one of the best things that we have in this country is the fact that everybody wants to be here, and to give that away randomly, to have no vetting system, to have no way to determine who comes, why they're here, and if they want to contribute to society is a problem. And the president strongly supports making sure that the people that come here want to be here for the right reasons and not to bring harm to our country. And I don't think that's something that any American shouldn't want to support. Jim?
They are ranked by their job that they have had, and they have to have minimum education.
Peter, the whole idea is that they are randomly selected. This isn't.
And have a certain ranking.
It's the lowest level of criteria that any part of our immigration system has is through the lottery system. And so to try to argue that this is a system that thoroughly vets people is just shows a total lack of understanding for what this process is.
Jim? Come in since the Uzbek gentleman yesterday came in. 350,000 people come to the country on this program. One of them now apparently has been accused of a terrorist act. One out of 350,000 create a problem then for that program?
There may be more. Look, all I know is that you can't randomly select people and not have them thoroughly vetted and not have the ability to know whether or not these people want to do good things or bad things when they get here. I don't think it's unreasonable to ask that people that want to come to this country go through a vetting process to make sure that when they get here, they want to contribute to society and not harm the people of this country.
Sure.
Jim?
Why did the president call the U.S. justice system a joke and a laughing stock during his comments in the debate?
That's not what he said.
He said that the system of justice in this
country
is a joke.
He said the process has people calling us a joke and calling us a laughing stock. Look, I think, as I told Margaret, he's simply pointing out his frustration of how long that this process takes, how costly this process is, and particularly for someone to be a known terrorist, that process shouldn't move faster. That's the point he's making. That's the frustration he has.
April. Separate subject, if I could, just other folks have a couple of questions each. Getting back to George Papadopoulos, does the president recall at that March 31st, 2016 meeting of his National Security Advisory Board, Mr. Papadopoulos suggesting a meeting between then candidate Trump and Vladimir Putin? Does he recall that?
No, I don't believe he does. April.
Sarah, two questions. First, Mary Frances Berry, the former head of the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, says everyone wants vetting, but to stop people from coming because they come from different countries is totally wrong. What say you?
Nobody said because they come from a different country. I think that's the whole definition of immigration, is that they wouldn't be U.S. citizens. We certainly haven't said that immigration as a whole should be outlawed. So
the diversity lottery is specifically for those coming from other nations that you are not favoring right now because you believe that there is a possibility of terrorism.
I believe that we have a fundamental right to protect the people of this country, and if we see or think that someone is a threat to United States citizens, that we should take every precaution that we can to protect the people of this country. And I don't think most Americans would disagree with that. In fact, most Americans do support extreme vetting and certainly support the protection of the citizens of this country.
And second question, last question, compromise, the issue of compromise. What is the definition of compromise as it relates to slavery and the Civil War?
Look, I'm not going to get in and relitigate the Civil War. It's like I told you yesterday. I think I've addressed the concerns that a lot of people had and the questions that you had, and I'm not going to relitigate history here.
When you left, so, and I'm going to ask the question again.
Why don't you ask it in the way that you're apparently accusing me of being?
I'm not accusing. I'm asking a question, Sarah. Seriously, the question is, does this administration believe, does this president believe slavery was wrong? And before you answer, Mary Frances Berry, a historian, said in 1860 there was a compromise. The compromise was to have southern states keep slavery, but the Confederacy fired on Fort Sumter that caused the Civil War. And because of the Civil War, what happened? The North won.
I think it is disgusting and absurd to suggest that anyone inside of this building would support slavery. Peter.
Yesterday from that podium you said all of our leaders have flaws. Washington, Jefferson, Roosevelt, and Kennedy. What are President Trump's flaws?
Probably that he has to deal with you guys on a daily basis.
In fairness, he doesn't deal with us on a daily basis. So what would you say in sincerity?
Most every day, actually, he
What are
does.
his flaws then, I guess? Simple question.
Yeah, I just gave you one. Trey.
Thanks, Sarah. Two questions for you. What does the future of Guantanamo Bay look like under the Trump administration?
I don't have any announcements or changes or adjustments to policy at this point.
Follow up on last night. Could you give us a little bit more of the tick-tock of how the president found out about this terror attack in New York City, how he immediately responded, who he got on the phone with right away, just trying to get a better understanding of where he was at this time, what he was doing, and what actions he took following the news?
The president was in the Oval Office when this took place, and he was first briefed by General Kelly shortly after it happened. I'm going to take one last question.
Sarah. Thank you, Sarah.
No, right here.
Thank you, Sarah. Will President President Trump look for enhancing anti-terror measures with other foreign countries during his visit to Asia? And also, will President Trump call the leaders of Argentina and Belgium to express his condolence?
I believe that arrangements are being made for him to speak with the leaders of those countries. They're working between the two teams to set that up. In terms of looking for conversations around anti-terrorism, that will certainly be discussed throughout the trip over the next several days. And as I said earlier this week, General McMaster will be here tomorrow to discuss the trip in more detail and certainly in more depth for the briefing tomorrow. Thanks so much and have a good day. We'll let you know later today what time that should be, but both will most likely take place in the afternoon. Thanks, guys.
Lots to get to there. A couple of things I think we're going to be following up on. There's some politics. There's obviously some politics in the middle of this, whether we like it or not, it's there. But I think the bigger news headline, at least for now, is the White House now considers this man, according to Sarah Sanders, an enemy combatant. This has been building throughout the day. Senator Graham of South Carolina, Senator McCain of Arizona, both say that they've gone to the president about, or Graham says he's gone to the president about this, but they're both in favor of it. That would mean that this suspect does not have a right to remain silent, does not have a right to have legal counsel. Senator Graham, Lindsey Graham, said in moments like this, it's important to gather intelligence, not to convict him in a court of law. Senator Graham says he spoke to the president about this and urged him along the way. And Senator McCain said the following: from Orlando to San Bernardino and Boston and Manhattan, we must not consider these attacks on our homeland in isolation, but rather recognize them for what they are, acts of war going on. As such, the New York terror suspect should be held and interrogated thoroughly, responsibly, and humanely as an enemy combatant consistent with the law of armed conflict. Now, they asked the president about this earlier, specifically, would you be in favor of sending him to Gitmo? Do we have that sound? Let's hear that.
Mr. President, do you want the assailant from New York sent to Gitmo? Thank you,
I would certainly consider that, yes.
Are you considering
I would certainly consider that. Send him to Gitmo. I would certainly consider that, yes.
And that's certainly an option that the president has. The system is in place for that. President Obama never did away with the prison at Guantanamo Bay or any of those other things. Of course, critics of this would say that this violates rights. It flies in the face of all that America is. Those who are proponents of this say, look, you can gather more intelligence this way. But let's remember some facts that are involved, because it's important to do that. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, one of the masterminds, is in Guantanamo Bay, has been there 15, 16 years, still doesn't face any charges. He's not been charged with anything. And yet, in federal courts, these terror charges have a 99% conviction rate. So, important to think about all of the things that go into this. Let's get to John Roberts at the White House. They just said we consider him an enemy combatant, I thought was noteworthy, John.
It is, because you'll remember Jose Padilla, who was the alleged dirty bomber, was also declared an enemy combatant as well. Never sent to Guantanamo Bay, as we said back at the beginning of the hour. He was sent to the brig in South Carolina and then eventually made it in to the civilian court system and is now behind bars for 17 years. But to declare him an enemy combatant would open up the door to be able to transfer him to a military president, at least for a time, if not permanently keep him in the military system. I don't know if the mechanism is there for him to actually go to Guantanamo Bay or not, though, because nobody who's ever been arrested on U.S. soil for committing a crime has gone to Guantanamo. Certainly, Sarah Huckabee Sanders said that this is an idea that the president supports, at least in principle, though she said that he is not actively advocating for it. Senator Lindsey Graham, as you pointed out, raised that point earlier today. Let's listen to what he said.
He is acting as a soldier of the caliphate, and we should treat him as a soldier of the caliphate. The idea that America is not part of the battlefield is insane.
So Lindsey Graham is suggesting that it doesn't matter where you perpetrate the act. If you are from a foreign country and you perpetrate an act of terrorism against the United States, whether it be somewhere overseas or whether it be here on the mainland, you do qualify as an enemy combatant. The fact that this person, unlike Padilla, was not a U.S. citizen but did have one of these green card visas may change things around legally, Shep. So we'll see if the president does pursue this. But again, just to reiterate what Sarah Huckabee Sanders said, he supports the idea, but not actively advocating for it. And certainly he'd get a lot of blowback from people like the ACLU. Shep?
A lot to go before anything like that. And John, you began this asking the question about the politicization of all of this.
Yeah, I remember asking the president a question as he was on his way to Las Vegas about the so-called bump stocks that the shooter in Las Vegas was using. And the president said, look, there's lots of time to talk about policy. Now is not the time to do it. And that was a couple of days after the attack. Hours after the attack, the president pointed fingers at the Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer to say the reason that this guy was in the country at all was because Chuck Schumer supported these diversity visas back in 1990. So I asked Sarah Huckabee Sanders earlier today, why different now than back then? Listen here.
After the horrific shooting in Las Vegas, the president repeatedly said, now is not the time to talk about policy. Now is not the time to talk about politics. That's for another time. Right now, we need to mourn the dead. Yet this morning, the president launched into a political argument with Senator Chuck Schumer on Twitter, literally hours after this incident yesterday. Why was he so quick to go the political route and point fingers at Chuck Schumer for the fact that this person was in the country at all?
Look, this wasn't about going the political route. This is something that, frankly, the president's been talking about for a long time. This isn't a new policy. This isn't a new position. This isn't a new conversation. The president has been talking about extreme vetting and the need for that for the purpose of protecting the citizens of this country since he was a candidate, long before he was ever president.
So the White House is insisting the president not politicizing this, but perspective is often based, Shep, on where you sit. Here at the White House, they don't think he was politicizing it. Chuck Schumer certainly thinks he did. And as well, New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio and Andrew Cuomo, the governor of New York, believe that he was politicizing it as well. In fact, Cuomo was quite pointed in saying he does not believe that the president's tweet this morning about Chuck Schumer, A, was factual, and B, was helpful. And he said the one thing that he cannot tolerate is somebody politicizing something like this. So I think it should be said that there's lots of policy debate that will go on as a result of what happened in New York City. Maybe some of it surrounding whether or not this guy should go to Guantanamo Bay. But some people are saying it's too early. We can't get into that now. We're still trying to figure out what happened. Still mourning the dead, sending out condolences. Let's talk about that first. Then we'll get to the politics of it. But the president insisting, because this is a direct threat to the national security of the homeland, needs to be talked about now. Shep?
Thanks very much, John Roberts at the White House. Always good to talk to you. It would be interesting and it'd be fascinating, really, if we weren't talking about the politics of this. But since the president is, and the White House spokesperson did, and talked about and labeling this man an enemy combatant, exactly what would that mean? In other words, what would happen if he were treated as a criminal, as a murderer in New York City? What would the process be, and how would that carry itself out? And what would happen if they designated him instead as an enemy combatant? We'll give you both sides of that from Judge Andrew Napolitano. He's very good at this stuff, and he'll be up next. And we've just gotten a bulletin in the last 15 seconds out of the United Kingdom, Dateline London. The counterpart to our Defense Secretary, Jim Mattis, the United Kingdom's Defense Secretary, Michael Fallon, has just resigned after allegations of inappropriate behavior. It is sweeping the nation and now the world. Michael Fallon, the UK Defense Secretary, is out, resigned after allegations of